As well as doing the posture individually with either hand, lead or rear, you can also do it with both hands together, in which case the posture is called flip the pancake. And because you're doing the posture with both hands, it's equally applicable to gap Farley as it is to brace Farley. All that changes is which hand is dominant, which is based on how you perform the posture, whether you perform it with open or perform it with close. And I know that there is some confusion around this because there's something a little bit like an ideology around the idea of releasing force in all directions, as if the force has equal power in all directions, and that's not the case. And Wang Xiangjia went to some efforts to explain that that's not the case. And in addition to his own writing on the subject, Yao Zongsun recalled a conversation in which Wang Xiangjia was emphasizing that actually you have no choice in this situation. We always single weight postures if we can, and if you single weight postures, just by definition the way the posture is stacked makes one part of the body more dominant than other parts of the body, i.e. it's more able to issue force, or it's stronger and more braced than other parts of the body. And Wang Xiangjia gave the example of the double front push, saying that one arm will always be dominant, no matter what, one arm will always be dominant. Remember, we don't want balanced force anyway, so we want the posture to be single weighted in that sense as well, because we want to maximise functionality, and it's a little bit pie in the sky to think that you're going to be repelling opponents from all directions. No, you want to be able to hit or push with force from a particular point to achieve a particular task. And this is what we call skewing a posture. It just ensures that one particular part of the body is dominant in that sense. So when we shift backwards, we're using open, and it looks very much like a jab. And then that changes when we use close, it looks very much like a cross. The difference is the posture is much more curtailed and the hit point is going up, so we're using rise much more prominently in the arms to make sure that that contact point, that hit point, that point of transmission of force is going up to the top of the arms rather than to the ends of the fist. And just like with a jab and a cross, when you use open, leaning back, we're not actually leaning back, that's a disease in Yiquan, people leaning back with postures. I don't know what they're thinking. That comes from not doing enough sparring, I think. If you get punched right in the face when you're leaning back, you will just topple backwards. I've seen it happen again and again. So we should say the posture shifts backwards, you keep that flexibility at the quad. The posture shifts backwards or shifts forwards depending on whether you're using open and close. And in open, the lead hand is dominant, whereas in close, the rear hand is dominant, just like with jab and cross. And notice the use of the pivot root. As per usual, it just points towards the hit point, so it's a very truncated movement, lead hand or rear hand, i.e. open or close. And whichever foot you're using to do the pivot root, that tells you that the other foot is flat on the floor, so it's making that solid contact with the heel, and that's how it's going to set on the floor. It's how, when you hit with force, that's going to be the solid contact point, where the energy is going to find that it's got nowhere to go except to push back into the weakest point. So that weakest point is either your opponent or it's some part of you, i.e. your joints or something like that. Hopefully the weakest point is going to be your opponent, and it's going to stumble them right off their route. That energy has got to go somewhere. And practicing the posture both ways, that also helps train your complementary routing, and you can see here clearly how one flows into the other, and you can see how it looks very much like the old way of doing a jab and a cross in early Yao's Yiquan. It's just missing the circle out with the hand, but you can see where that way of moving came from. It just naturally flows from the logic of this model. And you can feel this very naturally by just changing which foot you do the pivot root on, and you can see you do sometimes do postures, weird postures like that, but you can feel straight away how much weaker that makes the posture, how you lose the set and you lose the balance. It's only a rule of thumb though, sometimes you do have to do things like that to move out of the way. Every rule's there to be broken in each one. They're there to help, to be guides, not to be another kind of fetter. So once you've got the basic idea, then you can start trying to use Farley with the posture, and part of this is the idea that there's a spring between the legs and the lower part of the torso, and your whole structure is going to spring up into the posture. So don't forget, you're not just using open or close, you're using rise with the posture. So practice the Farley individually one way and then the other, and then try combining one and then the other. And that changing between postures also helps to advance your progress. It also helps to make the brain just connect much better to this movement paradigm. And as with all the natural set postures, you can see that they are like the basis of other postures like jab cross and lead hand and rear hand hook are contained within this posture. You just have to stack it slightly differently. Okay, next we can try adding something else onto it. So we're using a different kind of complementary routing. Remember, this is called quarter routing, where the foot doesn't just go straight down, it stays up so that you can do the postures very fast. So hit up and then palm strike in, using quarter routing. And you can see the foot, as it changes, pushing towards the target. See, like that, it just pushes towards the target. And you can see how that will brace against the push. So you see how it all knits together logically. And as you're lifting up, pushing in with that pivot root, you're also pushing down into the floor with the other foot, the setting leg. Well, they're both setting, but the dominant set is down the back leg and it's braced by the front leg. And also look carefully at the phasing of the movement. See the difference between the lead leg, the hips and the palm strike. They're all at slightly different points in the phase. Look carefully. 1, 2, 3. And then we try and get it a little bit faster, and then we try our best to compound the movement so it becomes less clearly two movements and starts to merge together into one movement. With pushes, you usually get extra force by just leaning down a bit, just sinking a little bit into the posture. But as we change to the hook, we want to stay high. And again, we're using quarter routing and hit and flow. So from that point, connects up and then just go straight out. And we call that hit and flow. There's no pullback. That's one of the things that quarter routing is very good for. And even though you're lifting up, don't stick your chin up. So I know there's this thing about your head feeling like it's suspended from a string, but that doesn't mean that you stick your chin out and get knocked out. And that's something that was discovered very quickly when particularly Yaozong's students started doing sparring. If you don't believe me, because I know there's so many Yao's Yiquan instructors who just don't get this. If you don't believe me, well, let's just have a quick word from Boji Kong, one of Yaozong's students. Actually, Yaozong's developed a whole Shili exercise to teach you to keep your chin down, but we'll look at that another time. In any case, lead hand dominant, flip the pancake into lead hand hook, quarter routing. Look at the dimensions of the posture, look at how it's stacked, and we want to try and combine that upwards and forwards movement. So we lift, then turn in round the central axis. And then again we go through the same process. If you clearly differentiate the two movements, you can get more power in each one, or you can make one more powerful than the other, more dominant. But usually we try and fuse them together step by step, try and get them smoother into one movement, in which case you'll no longer be able to see both lock points distinctly, you'll just see the end product, it'll look like one posture. And then it's exactly the same thing. If we just change how we stack the posture and use close, the rear hand becomes dominant. Then we just go through exactly the same process. So let's change again. This time we're using the flip the pancake. It looks like we're doing jab cross, but we're not. See, we're doing both hands straight up into flip the pancake, lead hand dominant, and then changing into the rear hand cross. Be careful, stumbling off your root. This time we're using complementary routing because one posture flows straight into the other. And then again, we try and get it faster and faster. We see how much we can merge the movement. You lose power, usually on the lead hand strike when you do that. But if we can get it faster and faster, we can get a faster combination, and then we can start getting that shimmy in with the shoulders to get that characteristic Yiquan speed in combinations. So watch carefully as the movement becomes more fluid. The lock point becomes hidden in the fluidity of the movement. And similarly, when we do it slowly, there's a bigger movement using the complementary routing, a bigger dip down into the posture, which helps to add power. But then when we do it fast, that becomes much smaller. It becomes lost as we just drop with the gravity. We're already pushing back up into the rear hand punch. See how it just kind of, it almost disappears, but you can feel it in your body as a kind of drop in the gravity. And if you get that drop wrong and lean forward too much, you will slip. At least on surface that I'm training on here is quite slippy, so you've got to keep that posture straighter. Don't lean forward just because you're dropping the weight forwards. Don't drop your torso forwards. And the reason you slip is because you use your torso to set down on the front foot when you over lean like that. It's just exactly the same when we do a double front hands push. We lean the torso forward. It forces a compression set onto the lead leg, and if you're not prepared for it, it can make you slip on a slippy surface. Okay, so we change again, this time stacking the initial flip the pancake with close and then changing into, well, we're going to do uppercut, lead hand uppercut. And you can see that as we shift forwards, the rear hand is dominant because we're using close, but when we shift back, then the lead hand becomes dominant and we're doing uppercut with the lead hand. And remember that with the uppercut, the elbow doesn't come right under the fist. If it comes right under the fist, it makes it a really weak structure. Not so much if the elbow is very close to your body, but with this kind of Yiquan elbow where it's quite far out from your body, it makes it a very vulnerable structure. It's really easy to pull a muscle, so you keep it on an angle. And that's really structurally sympathetic with this posture because you have to do less work to get it from one posture to the other. Also, again, pay close attention to the complementary routing. Once you can get this kind of complementary routing down, then you can use more advanced versions. There's always a more advanced version. It's just that some of them haven't even been invented yet. They're somewhere out there in the infinite curriculum, waiting for future Yiquan genius to unfold them. And see the overall structural sympathy, not just the routing. See the way the dip into the body then feeds into the lifting up and back with the uppercut. If you don't know why you lean back with an uppercut, by the way, if you ever lean into an uppercut and don't quite hit the bag, you will go flying forward and then you'll know why you lean back. And then, as with all the other postures, a key part of our training practice is to bring it into standing, to micro movement, visualizing the posture. So now we want to visualize opening and closing with the kwa. We want to get that feeling where you just use the imagery in your mind to elicit a response in your body, but it doesn't even need to be a completely physical response. As I always say, you're really starting to get it if you can just lie down in bed and think about the posture, and you can feel the posture just by thinking about it, just by triggering it in your mind. And then using micro movements and slow movements, and just playing with all the different variations and ways of practice, actually doing it with explosive force. That's the least thing that we do. That's the thing that we do. Maybe 10% of our practice is that, 90% of it is all the other kinds of practice that then lead into that. And then once you've got that down, then you can start thinking about variations. For example, you can think about lengthening the posture so it gets a little bit more like a jab or a cross, for example. Only remember that the energy isn't going forward so much as up, but stacking the posture differently, making it bigger, making it smaller. Thinking about how the routing will change as you stack the posture slightly differently, how your towel slightly changes with slight adaptations, because ultimately there aren't just two versions of everything. There isn't just an A and a B version. There's infinite different variations of every posture.